In this video, I'm going to show how I made this impossible dovetail joint ring box for my daughter's wedding. My daughter and her fiancé are getting married next summer, and they wanted something unique for their wedding. So I decided to make this ring box as a gift for them to use in the ceremony. Now, before I show how I made the ring box, I'll show you my design process so you can see how I got to the end product. I'm going to start by digging through my scrap pile to find some pieces that I can use to make a prototype. Because I don't want to go through and use some expensive hardwood until I have a little better idea of what I'm doing. I'll run this piece through my joiner to get a good flat face and a square edge that will help ink glue up. Then I will take and run them on my crosscut sled and get them cut to length. With those nice square edges that I created on my joiner, I've got plenty of surface area for the glue to have a good strong bond. So I'll clamp these together and wait for them to dry. Once they dry, I'll face join them and then get a parallel edge from my planer. Then I'll square up the outside edge, and then I'll install my dado stack and my table saw to remove a majority of the material for this dovetail joint. Trying to remove all of this material with a dovetail bit is going to put too much stress on the bit and cause it to break.
You think we need one more? You think we need one more? All right, we'll get one more.
Once I get my dado stack to the desired thickness, then I will run it through the material a few times to clear out the majority of that waste. Then using my setup blocks, I will adjust the blade to the correct height. In this case, it's going to be 3/8 of an inch. I'll put the 3/8 block on the table, and then I'll use the 1, 2, 3 block in the set to set on top of it and raise the blade up until it meets the 1, 2, 3 block. Then I'll adjust the fence and make a pass, spin it around, and make another pass. And then I'll adjust it for the center grooves, make a pass, switch it around, and make another pass. Now to install a dovetail bit in my router table. Get this thing in here nice and tight. Put in my safety rings to keep things from falling in the table. Adjust it to the right height. And then I'm going to add this auxiliary fence to make it smooth all the way across. Double checking my adjustments. With everything set, I will then run the piece through the table. And on this second one, that horrible noise is that bit climbing up into the workpiece. My router table's not holding like it should. So I'm going to have to back up and punt. I have a new plan. Rather than trying to salvage the prototype, I bought this bloodwood and some ambrosia maple that I'll use for the lid and the body, and some walnut for the bottom and a top accent, and I'm going to do everything on the table saw. I'm measuring out 2 1-foot pieces, because that's as small as I can get through my planer safely, even though it is more than I need for the entire box. I should be able to get 2 boxes out of what I'm cutting from these pieces. After I cut the pieces that I need, then I'll take them to my joiner, where I will face and edge join each piece, and then I will take and glue them together to make a wider board. These bloodwood boards are wide enough to be able to make the top of the box, but I want to be able to turn the box at a 45-degree angle so that it will look like face grain all the way around, instead of face grain on 2 sides and edge grain on the other 2. Now the ambrosia maple is wide enough to be able to make the bottom of the box, but it's not quite thick enough. So I'm going to face glue 2 of these together to get the desired thickness. And then I'll stick these in the clamps until the glue dries. Once the glue dries, I will face join them on the joiner. Check to make sure that it's flat. Run it through the planer. And then cut it down to size on my table saw. Here I'm using these clamps to rip a straight edge on one side. And then I will use that side as a reference to cut the other two sides square. Then I'll reference the original side to make it parallel. And by now the lid is dry. So I'll plane it, cut it to length, cut it to width, and now I can start working on that dovetail joint. Here I'm using my marking knife and a setup block to mark for the thickness, and then I'll use my Cat's Moses dovetail jig to mark out the angle. Now I'm having a little problem getting the square to line up, even though this jig has magnets in it. Not enough hands to hold it straight. So I use my angle gauge to get the measurement from the jig, and then transfer that onto the workpiece, and then mark it with my marking knife. Once I mark the one angle, then I will flip it over so that I can get the other. And then I will check it against the top, and then back to the table saw. Using my setup blocks, I'll set up the height, and then I'll start removing material. On this one, compared to the prototype, I decided to only do 2 dovetail grooves instead of 4 like on the prototype. I found that doubling the grooves doubled my margin of error, and since I'm doing this more by hand and not on a CNC, I really don't have that margin to work with. I can be a little less precise and still come out with a tight-fitting joint. With that waste material out of the way, then I will put my regular table saw blade back in the table, and I will use that to cut the dovetail angle inside these grooves. Once again, I'll use my dovetail jig to get the angle that I need to set up my table saw. These magnets make it nice for adjusting the blade and setting it to the angle that I need. And then I will adjust the height. With the angle and the height set, now it's time to adjust the fence so that I can sneak up on that cut. I want to make sure that I don't remove too much, because if I do, I can't put it back on. Or I can, but not very easily, and it'll never look right. And it'll never work right. Here I will check the fit, and then I'll use my chisel to remove some extra material. And then I will repeat this process a few more times until I can sneak up on that fit. Now I feel like I'm close enough that I can switch to hand sanding and hand tools. Here I've taken and cut an angle in this block and wrapped some sandpaper around it so that I can maintain the same angle as I sand this block. I don't want to inadvertently round something over that I can't put back on. Here I'm using a mini router plane to get in and remove a burr left by the table saw in the corner of that groove. And now a little more sanding. Of course, whenever I say a little more sanding, I mean a lot more sanding. But I'm not going to show it all to you, because that'd be pretty boring. And then once again, I will check the fit. It's getting close. If you're enjoying this video, please hit like and subscribe. And click the bell icon to be notified when a new video comes out. It's close enough now where I feel like I can start cutting it down to its final dimensions. I'll start by cutting this block in half, and then I'm going to make one box. I'll save the other one for a future project. And now I'll check the fit. Works great. Now I need to mark for cutting off the corners. By doing so, this will have the dovetail showing one on each side instead of two on each end. I'm measuring to find the center point to make sure whenever I cut this that the dovetails show evenly spaced all the way around. Since the box is a square, then I will just measure center to center all the way around, and I'll come up with a smaller square. Then I will cut off the first corner on my miter saw. I will mark the next two sides using my square. I'll clamp down the workpiece so that it holds it securely in place while I cut it. Because of the thickness of my crosscut sled, I can't raise the blade high enough to get all the way through the box in one pass. So I'll cut off the bottom, and then I will flip it over and cut off the pieces for the top. And finally, I will cut off the last side, making it a square again. In the process of making the cuts and flipping it over, I was left with some saw marks on the side of the box. So I'll take it over to my belt sander and clean it up. And then I'll give it a good sanding with the random orbit sander. Sanding through the grits of 120, 180, and 220, making it nice and smooth to the touch. And here's how it looks before I start hollowing it out to put the rings in it. Now it's time to start working on the bottom. I'm using my marking gauge to mark a center line on this piece of walnut so that I can resaw it. My blade has a tendency to wander, so rather than relying on a fence, I'm just going to follow the line manually, using a push stick so I don't cut my finger. Again. Now with my two pieces of walnut, I will glue them together. Now again, these boards are wide enough to use for the box, but not quite wide enough to orient the grain in the direction that I want to. So I'll glue that together, I'll let it dry. And while I'm waiting on that to dry, I'll work on hollowing out the box. Here I'm using my square to find center, and I'll use a punch to locate that center hole. So when I take it to my drill press, I can use the tip in that Forstner bit to make sure that I stay center. I'll get everything adjusted, tighten down the fence, clamp everything down nice and tight to make sure that it doesn't wander on me. I go. Using my shop vac to remove as many of the chips as possible. Taking it nice, slow, and easy. Now I'll run this down to where the point just barely pokes out the back side, and then I will flip it over and finish it off. That'll keep from blowing out that back side and ruining the bottom, even though I'm going to cover it with another piece of walnut. Since my largest Forstner bit is 2 inches, I'm going to use my 3/8 inch ravening bit to increase the diameter by 3/4 of an inch. Now that is too much material to take off in one pass, so I'll have to make a few passes to get all of that cleaned out. I'll take off about 1/4 of an inch with each pass. Now that my walnut glue up is dry, I will mark out the bottom and then I will go cut it on the bandsaw. Fortunately, I forgot to hit record on that, so I don't have that. So now I'm going to tape off the inside pieces so whenever I glue it up, I don't get any glue stuck in places where I can't get it out. Because as tight as that box is, I'm not going to be able to sand that out. And now I'll trim off the extra tape to make sure that I don't get any stuck between the pieces. And now I'll put a good coating of glue on there, clamp it up, and set it aside. And now to start working on the top. I want to be able to see through the top, but I don't want to use glass. This is going to be handled by children in the ceremony, and I don't want them to drop and break it and then cut themselves. So, I'll use a piece of plexiglass. I want to make a walnut ring to go around it to hide the edges of the plexiglass. I don't think I'm going to be able to cut it smooth enough that it would look right. Not on this type of project. I used my largest Forstner bit to clean out the middle, and then I got a larger hole saw to get to the diameter of the plexiglass. I'm using my chisel to clean out the rest of it. Now it's hard to see, but there is a pencil line there for the outside of the ring. Now with all that cut out, then I'll use my Forstner bit to go back through the other side, and then I can cut out the plexiglass to make sure that it'll fit. I'm using a Sharpie to make my line because a pencil just wasn't cutting it. I'm sandwiching the plexiglass between the table and this board to make sure that I don't overflex it whenever I'm cutting it. I don't want to accidentally snap the plexiglass. And I'll use my coping saw rather than using anything more aggressive for the same reason. Next, I'll sand down the edges to give it a better fit. And then I will check to make sure that I've got a good solid fit. I don't want the plexiglass laying loose under the ring. I used my bandsaw to cut close to the pencil line that I had marked on the board. Now I'm using my belt sander to go through and sand the rest of the way down to the line, paying very close attention to make sure that this thing stays round. I put a lot of work into this one little piece to have to start over. And now I'll tidy everything up with some hand sanding. And now it's starting to take shape. Now there's one last detail, besides the fact that my camera's falling. I need to make some fingers to hold the ring, so I'm going to shape a couple of fingers out of this piece of bloodwood and fasten them in the box. So this was a really fun project to make. For those of you that are still watching, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already clicked like and subscribe, please do so. Click the bell notification to be notified when a new video comes out. Thanks. Until next time, be safe.